Hi, folks. This video is going to be a little bit different than I normally do. It's still related to the poem, but I want to kind of give you a perspective as to how I arrived at the place that I'm at now and why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I'm going to give you some examples that have to do with the poem, and some examples I'm kind of give you are kind of funny. So I'm going to be doing mostly a lot of talking in this, and hopefully you enjoy it because I'm going to use some real life examples about thinking outside the box, but not too far outside the box. So everybody knows that Forrest Fenn created a poem that if you correctly solve the clues and you follow it precisely, it becomes a map that's going to lead you to a physical treasure that's somewhere north of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and in the Rocky Mountains. Now, the chest has been found. It's gone. It was found in the state of Wyoming. So we know that. But let's forget about that for the moment because we're talking about the poem here, right? The only thing you need to do to locate the treasure is solve the poem. You don't have to do anything else. Now, you don't even see the name Forrest Fenn inside the poem. You don't need to know anything about Forrest Fenn. You don't need to know anything about where he went, nothing about his backstory. Your solution only requires the poem. So no matter how you arrive at your solution, it's got to work with the poem. That's the primary reason why I'm doing it. When Forrest Fenn created this, like I said in my other video, he essentially made a map, right? So I use Disney as an example. A map that Disney gives out, for example, is going to tell you where you're going. It's going to have a big X on it and say Disney is here. All right. And then the people who made that map, they don't know where you're coming from. So what they're going to do is give you directions. If you're coming from the north, go this way. If you're coming from the south, go this way, or the east or the west. They're going to do all the cardinal directions, and they're going to tell you how to arrive at that X, right? Because they don't know where you're coming from. And that's important to remember that. They don't know your origin or where you're going to begin your trip, right? So Forrest Fenn kind of had two problems. Number one, he can't give you the destination. He can't throw an X on the map. That would defeat the whole purpose of having a treasure hunt. So he doesn't give you a destination. And the other problem that he has is he doesn't know where you're starting. So in order for him to give you precise directions, you absolutely must base those directions on a precise starting point. And Forrest Fenn told us that. He said, if you have the wrong word, warm word, salt sense, you might as well stay home and play canasta because it's impossible for you to get there. Because like I used in my other example, if I was getting you to Disney and I wrote a map, I can't do that unless you say, where are you coming from? Like, are you coming from California? Are you coming from New York? Depending on where you're coming from, the directions are going to be completely different. Like for example, in New Jersey, I would probably have you go on the turnpike. So I would tell you to head on 95 South. Well, those directions are not going to work if you're coming from California. And vice versa. If I wrote the directions from California to come to Florida, it's not going to work if you're up in New Jersey. First of all, you're not going to find a road. Second of all, if you're going to head east, you would end up in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So Forrest Fenn had two problems. I can't give you the destination, and I need to make sure that I get you to an accurate starting location. But this is a puzzle, so I don't want to make it easy. I'm challenging you to solve my poem and find this treasure chest. And he's saying in order to do that, you're going to need to study the poem and analyze the poem and then figure the clues out. And then once you have the clues figured out, then you can get to the right starting point, and then all of the instructions in the poem are going to work. But because, like I said, it's a game of like hide and seek, he's not going to give you the precise locations in just verbatim right there in your face. Like he's not going to tell you, okay, go to Sinks Canyon at the sink. That's where warm water salt. Because he's not going to tell you, because then essentially you'd be giving away everything, right? So his way around that was to create vague clues, okay, that will work in many places. But the only one that matters is the one that he wants you to go to. So in order to get there, you have to solve the poem. And it'll eventually tell you where to begin it. That's why he mentions the T.S. Eliot quote, right? We had two different kinds of searchers on here. We had the searchers that were not necessarily analysts. They wouldn't analyze the poem. They would read it, but then they would read it and they're looking for these places directly. And the reason why they're doing that is because you had like websites like Dow's, and he broke the clues up himself into 9 different groups, right? Where warm water salt, canyon, not far but too far to walk, Homa Brown, and so on. That was a big mistake on Dow's part because he essentially took the clues out of the poem. So now when you go to the individual forums, you're not looking at the context in which the clue is lied, right? So what he should have done was broke it up into 6 forums, 6 stanzas, and people figure out each stanza. But by the time Forrest Fenn probably realized that he did this, right? And Forrest Fenn can't come out and correct Dow because then he would give away too much information because he would essentially tell you how the poem works. So instead of doing that, they had these Q&As with Jenny and a lot of questions asked. If I were told, meet me at a place where warm water salt somewhere in the mountains north of Santa Fe, would that be enough information to discover where warm water salt? And Forrest Fenn's answer was no. If you don't have all the ingredients, you're not going to know where to begin. You're not going to be able to make the cake, right? So he was hinting at the fact that it's wrong. You can't just look on a map and find something synonymous with where warm water salt. That's not the way it works. But anyway, those are the initial people. Those were the chase newbies that would come in. They would usually filter in through Dow's. And they were all excited. And then some of them bought Thrill of the Chase. And even though Forrest Fenn said the hints are subtle, they started using the book and solving the book instead of solving the poem. So they would go in the book and say, look, Yellowstone's all over here, so it's got to be there. So we ended up with a lot of people eventually ended up in Yellowstone, like a big bulk of the searchers. Now, before I go on, I'm not saying that it wasn't there. All I'm saying is that they weren't solving the poem, number one. Number two, the hints are subtle, but he names those places in Yellowstone in the book. He's got pictures in the book of people standing at certain locations throughout the park, right? So it's not subtle. And he said that the hints were subtle. So to me, he's not going to name them. If he names a place directly, you can rule it out. That was my thought, right? Then that was what I would communicate on the boards. And then you had to the other extreme, you had people that were way outside the box, and they were looking at things like periodic tables for chemistry. And they thought like AS, well, that's the symbol for gold. So this, and they were using periodic tables to try to, because they thought that like Forrest Fenn created like some hidden algorithm, and people, of course, started throwing the poem in the grids, and they were looking upside down and backwards and forwards and going to the corner because it spells out IDEA if you do it clockwise, idea, and then there's the word idea in the, so they were looking for all kinds of crazy things. They were too far outside the box. That's why Forrest Fenn was telling them to get back in the box, right? So all you really need to do is read the poem, and that's why I'm doing it. I thought that it's got to be somewhere in the middle. So eventually, as time went on, and I stopped doing all of those bad things that I was doing, I was just jumping all over the map. I decided that I was going to do the grammar. And that's how basically everything started, right? And as I continued to do the grammar, at one point, I asked myself, I said, what if none of these places in the poem physically exist anywhere? And I would talk to my partners, or I would talk on the forums about that. And people were like, oh, so you're saying it's a hoax? Just don't exist? This whole thing is in your mind? And I said, no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is Forrest Fenn said to use your imagination. So to me, what that means, if you sit yourself somewhere in the middle of those two extremes, when you're reading a story, when somebody mentions the name of a place, you don't immediately jump to a map and try to locate it. You just say, okay, that's a place. Let me put it in my mind at whatever context is currently in the story. It's a place that they're talking about. It only exists within the story. So I'm like, what if Forrest Fenn did that? What if the Homa Brown initially, until you figure it out, the Homa Brown is on line 8? What if where warm water salt is actually on line 5? If it was a story, right, and I said that I was at this place and I called it warm water salt, let's say in my book, right? And then I would say we went around the corner and then we went down here. So I'm giving you all the directions related to that place, right? But remember, that place only exists in the story. It's not real. We're reading a novel, right? So what you do is you paint a picture in your head of what he just described, right? So when you're analyzing the poem, that's what I mean when I say that the clues only exist in the poem, because imagination means that it's not real, right? So all of those places you mentioned, where Warm Water Salt, Canyon Down, Homa Brown, they only exist in the poem for now. So anytime he says something in the poem, think of it that way, all right? Because it's a story. You wouldn't analyze a story like that. You wouldn't be reading a book and about, he mentioned Wimpy's Hamburgers. Let me write that down. Oh, he mentioned, Taylor's factory or something like that. And then you write that down. Those places are fictitious. They only exist in the book. And they're doing that to set up a relationship. And they're gonna either do a forward or a reverse reference to that at some point in the story. So in other words, the Homa Brown could be something that you just read, right? Or they might reference something in the future or something, and then later in the future, they refer back to that place, right? So that's how stories work. And you're painting that picture in your mind. That's what Forrest is talking about. Here's the thing that started triggering it all. In 2015 or so, I was kind of doing what Sam did. And yeah, this is a little bit about my sob, but I said, if you handed this poem to a kid, what if the kid took it literally and drew on the map? I mean, literally, right? So when it says begin at where warm water salt, I put my pen down and I put my pen right where warm water salt. And it said, take it down. I moved my hand down. And then I would go down to the next line. It's in the canyon down. Okay, so I'm in the canyon. Let's keep going. I'm not in the canyon yet. Not far, but too far to walk. You're getting there, but you're not here yet. All of a sudden, it says put in below the home brown. Okay, so I went below line number 4 and I started going left below the home of Brown. So I had a line coming down from Hall, and then I made a left and I was going below the home of Brown. All right, and then he says, up above that in the stanza, as I've gone alone in there. So I noticed that there's a word there. So I go down to the word there and I started going down. I went in there, right? Just at an arbitrary location at this point, because I haven't met Sam yet and all of this stuff. So I go into the word there. And then when you read that, he goes, from there, it's no place for the meek. So I figured to myself, okay, no place for the meek would be the end. So I took my pen and I went to the end, right? To the end of the line, right? And then I went down to the next line and it says, there'll be no paddle up your creek, just heavy lows and water high. Well, the line that I read before that, where I got to the end, said that everything was drawn nigh. So I went left again. So I was drawing on the map. Then I talked about that, and then Sam seen it, and Sam said, well, are you interested in teaming up with me? And eventually I said, yeah. And then he sent me a solution. And when I looked at it, I'm like, oh my God, like I came up to the same realization that you did, except I did it differently. I was drawing on it. He was not drawing on it. He was actually moving the lines themselves, right, into that column where one more salt. So that's how I ended up meeting Sam. But the point that I want to say is not about my sob. The point is that what I do when I'm reading stuff and I'm trying to comprehend it, if I'm studying something, I'll take notes, right? But or sometimes I'll fire up Microsoft Paint. In the case I did with the poem, right? So I would draw. Okay, he would say begin at where warm water's halt. So I would draw something, right? Excuse my drawing skills. Okay, so I drew a lake. It doesn't really matter. And then it's plural. So I had like a bunch of creeks or something connected to it, right? So this is the water, and this is where it's halting. Okay. Forget about doing anything on maps. It's all in my imagination. And in my imagination, there's water. I don't know if it's a lake. I don't know what it is. Okay. Something is formed there. Okay. And then we read the next line, and we know that this water is going in a canyon down. So in my mind, I imagined a river. So the river's going down. Okay. When he says down, he's talking about downstream. It's clear that water is involved here. Whether this is, we eventually find out that this is a creek, not a river. But because he never mentions river, but he does say your creek, up your creek. So I assume, okay, so now I know a little bit more information. We have a creek. So if we're up at high elevation, we're going downstream. All rivers or all creeks. I don't care where they are. Coming down, taking the canyon down. He doesn't tell us on the next line. He goes, not far. The place that he's sending us to, and I'm just going to draw an arbitrary X here. The place he's sending us to is not far, but it's too far to walk. So I'll draw this X somewhere in the canyon. So it starts carving a canyon up here. Okay. And then, of course, canyons, all of them, go all the way down to the base of the mountain. So here's our canyon. So what I'm doing is I'm drawing what I'm reading, right? Begin at where warm water salt, take it in the canyon down. So I have something. I don't yet know what it's a creek or a river, but it's in my imagination. There's something going from a high elevation, cutting through a canyon and going down, right? Then he says, put in below the home of Brown. So to me, what he's defining as this area where you began is the home of Brown up here. It seems obvious to me. I could be wrong, but right now I'm just sketching things in my mind, right? So he says, put in below that. Below means lower in elevation. That's the definition for the preposition, which is what he's using in there, at a lower elevation. Okay. So what he's telling you, he already told you it's too far to walk where he wants to send you. So what I imagine in my mind, so this place now is a location that he wants to get you. This is the origin up here. So in my mind, I imagine a road that has a lot of switchbacks because you're going up a mountain. Okay. And then it goes down. So somewhere, because he told us we can't walk, right? So we're not going to follow the stream because he's telling you can't walk, right? And eventually we know we're not paddling. So remember global context. So we're not going that. Whatever it is, it's going downstream. Okay, it's going down. He's sending us to a location that we can't walk to. So instead, he's telling you to put in. And since we know we're going to walk, I'm going to assume right now that we're going to drive. So we're driving down, right? So we're looking for the home of Brown. We don't know where that is yet, but we find an intersection. Let's say the intersection is here. Okay. And it follows a creek. It's a road going up. All right. At that spot where we're supposed to put in, right here, there's a sign where we're coming down the road. And this sign is basically, now imagine if you were coming this way on the road, right? There's probably going to be a sign here that says, go this way to go to this place. Turn off here. Okay. Now we know in that stanza it's saying that in our future, in other words, it says currently you're down here, and he describes what's up here, right? So he's saying that where you're at there, okay, it's from there. It's meaning where you came from. It's no place for the meek. The end is ever drawing nigh. That way, okay. And then he says, there will be no paddle up your creek. So now we know for sure that this is a creek. And now it's beginning to make sense. He's saying there will be no paddle up your creek, just heavy loads and water high. So this sign in this direction is going to have something to do with heavy loads and water high. Okay. Water high means water it's higher. It's at a high elevation. It's extending up. Okay, in elevation. That's what water high is. Now, heavy loads, we still know what they are, but I would imagine they're rocks. You know, loads means there's a lot of them, and heavy, a lot of heavy objects, right? So something is going to be synonymous. When we get to the boots on the ground point, which we're not at yet, is going to be synonymous with heavy loads and water high. Go this way for heavy loads and water high. Go this way and up into the home Brown. And then, of course, you're going to a place that you're going to walk from. We already know that. So let's say this place goes to here. And let's say over here, there's some place where you will park. Now you're out of your car. Okay. Now, what he wants you to do is walk. Okay. And then you're going to get to the blaze, and that's the end of that, right? That's the way I envision it. You're now walking up into the canyon from below. You're going to arrive at some point, okay, where you finally got to the blaze. Okay. So remember that last part. Let me do it in a different color. So that last part in purple is where you're walking. You're going to walk to a blaze. And then when you get to that blaze, you're near the chest. And like I said, I don't really want to discuss the solve here, but this is one way to do your imagination. Now, the other thing that I want to point out is all maps usually have an indication of north, okay? And it would be something like they would have an arrow and they would have an N on it, right? Because of the way Forrest Fenn is describing this, we don't yet know which way north is. Because as you know, this mountain is round, and not all streams go south, right? As a matter of fact, up in Wyoming, all of the water flows north. It doesn't flow south at certain points. The Green River goes south, but everything like north of the Wind River flows north up into Montana. And a lot of people just in their mind, for some reason, they think that all water flows down towards the equator. That's not the way it works. So we could be looking south and on the north side of the mountain, and something's coming down. We could be on the west side looking east, and there's something coming down. We could be on the south side. He doesn't mention anything about where north is, right? Yet. Or it depends on when we get to the point of solving the clues. He might be using other clues where things are cold is going to be to the north, stuff like that. But again, this is not a solve. But this is how you do your imagination. And this ultimately is how I ended up with my sob. So I was looking for that situation. So that's what the advantage of is by using your imagination, right? And thinking outside the box, I said, you're not going to go to the low extreme and just read the clues and try to jump to a map. You're smart enough to know that you're going to have to figure the poem out and do an analysis like we're doing. And it also means don't go overboard. Don't start taking the poem and reading it in Spanish and thinking that warm water salt that agua fria because it's Spanish. Just the poem is written in English. It's not written in Spanish. Yeah, let me show you something really quick here. We all know what a canyon is. There's the definition of canyon. Okay, it's derived from the Spanish canon, which has a different spelling, which means tube, based on the Latin cana, reed, cane. Definition: a narrow chasm with steep cliff walls cut into the earth by running water. That's a canyon, right? Now remember, when your boots on the ground, it's physically going to be a canyon. But when you're in the poem, everything is in your imagination. In the jump starting learning curve, that was when if the sun was out, he would jump out the window and slide down, okay, and he would run while the Spanish teacher was writing words on the board, right? And he never understood why the Spanish teacher would try to teach Spanish by writing Spanish words. And we also know in the poem, he's kind of talking about listening to homonyms. A homonym are two words that have the same pronunciation, but two different meanings. And that's kind of what I believe that's part of the hint that he has in stanza 6 when he says, so hear me all and listen good, right? So we have canyon. You all know how canyon spells. So let's look up canon the way it is here with these accent marks above these letters. Let's look that up. Okay, so that's the definition for that. Origin, Old English, derived from Latin and from Greek, canon, rule. Definition, a generally accepted rule. Or it could be works that are generally accepted as the real work of a particular writer or as being important. In other words, the Shakespeare canon. So basically, the canon is a list of works. In religion, it's a list of rules. And we know Forrest Fenn is always talking about these rules, right? So what if stanza 3 is basically the rules, which they're giving you directions, right? So if you were to look up the origin of canyon, here's how it sounds when it's spelled this way.
canyon, 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 canyon.
So, as you can see, it's pronounced exactly the same way. Up until I don't remember when it switched over. Well, it tells you the origin is the mid 19th century. So, sometime around 1850, they started spelling it this way. Okay. But it was originally spelled this way prior to 1850. And now you know Forrest Fenn, when he's talking about Lewis and Clark, he's talking about 1803, right? So this is the way it was spelled back then. And this is the way it sounded. Now, that would kind of be special knowledge, so I want to shy away from that. But I just wanted to mention that because that's going to come up later on down the road. But this is how you use your imagination, okay? And remember that all of these clues at first only exist in the poem. So you're going to draw them out and eventually follow them, right? That's what he means by imagination being more important than knowledge and thinking outside the box. So if you're not that good with your imagination, paint pictures. Don't do it now. Wait until you have a full grammar understanding of the poem, right? But what you're going to do is read it now that you have that understanding and then paint a picture. Nobody cares what it looks like. You're only drawing it for yourself. Just sit there and Microsoft paint a picture. What is he describing? Close your eyes and think. Okay, begin it where warm water, salt, and take it, and just draw it. Okay, and then imagine to yourself, he's telling me that not to go this way because it's too far to walk. But then he's telling me to put in Bilodeau and Brown, so he probably wants me to drive. So just imagine that you're driving down the zigzag road, you're going down the mountain, and you're going to put in somewhere down here. Put in, we're not in the water, so we're not going to use a nautical term. But put in basically means to put yourself into a position. Put in, like you could be putting in, you could be driving down the road and say, put in over there at the shopping mall. You're pulling into the parking lot. So it's just has kind of the same meaning. When you start talking about nautical now, we know we're not traveling in the water. You didn't tell us to follow the water. So why would you use a nautical term? We're not going down the water and leaving the water and coming out of one of the banks. I know a lot of solves do that. They say, I'm going to go down this river and I'm going to take the boat and then I'm going to pull the boat to the side and put in and get out of the river. Well, how did you get in the river to begin with? See, that's already your mistake, right? When you imagine it, you're going to be able to see flaws like this, okay? And it's going to help you get a mental image of the poem. And it's going to make sure that you stay within the box, but don't be closed-minded. Don't go all the way on the low end where you're just picking low-hanging fruit because Forrest Fenn used to fish there. And don't go all the way on the other end and look at periodical tables, okay? Or try to look at ciphers because that's not what it is either. Just treat it as a poem with labels and words that have meaning, in the poem only. Everything is used to reference forward and backward, okay? And the way he does that is through the tense changes in the verbs. He's telling you something that's going to be in your future. He's telling you what's current, what's in your past. As I have gone. Have gone means he started in the past and he never returned. Pretty clear. So if you picture that all in your mind and actually draw a little picture, if you want to, of Forrest, and he's up here, right? He took that trip, meaning that he got to a point over here. Now, if it was too far for you to walk up here, it's also too far for him to walk. So he obviously went this way, right? That's why I believe that it in stanza 2 is referring to the first stanza. Because the first stanza is describing what Forrest did, as I have gone alone in there and with my treasures bold. So when it says begin it, it seems pretty obvious to me that it is the steps he took. He wants you to follow his steps. That's your quest. Follow me, follow it. Okay. And then if you follow the word it through the poem on the top, he's telling you where to go. And then on the bottom of the poem, where he has so, it is referring back up to the stanzas that it rhymes with. It's clear through the rhyme scheme. So he rhymes us back to stanza 3 when he's in stanza 5. And stanza 6 rhymes us back to stanza 1. And if you painted the picture of it, you would actually see all of that. And you would end up with Forrest standing somewhere in the middle of a canyon. It would be really clear. And then, of course, stanza 5 and 6 are going to give you hints as to where this place is. But we know that the first clue is begin at where warm water salt. We also know that there's 9 of them. We know that they're contiguous, means that they touch, and they're one after another. That would mean that when you found the blaze, you're on the 9th clue. And if you look at the blaze, that's it. That's all in one sentence. So technically, and also in the poem itself, you're done when you take the chest and go in peace. So we know for sure that is where you're going to end after you're on boots on the ground. But the poem doesn't end there. It's still got 2 more stanzas. And those 2 stanzas are essentially providing more information about what he's describing up here. That's in stanza 6, okay? And it's describing what he did using the clues. And the clues are his canyon. So I cleared that now, and at this point, I just wanted to kind of tell you that's what I mean about thinking, staying inside the box, but keeping your mind open. Based on reading the book, one of the problems that Forrest Fenn appeared to have is that when you're getting a formal education, they set boundaries up in your mind. They force you to stay within those boundaries, right? When you're a child, you don't have any boundaries. When your imagination can run wild. Anyway, let me finally end this. Peace.